really quickly. But like, hello to everyone watching the recording. This is the March transits. I kind of like compiled all of this information about like kind of the major movements of March to kind of like a lot of people have been keying into the energy of March, like through their intuition, and I've really felt like a big shift coming. And astrologically speaking, that really pans out. So I'm just gonna kind of like dissect the energy using the planets. But I'm Allie. I use she/her pronouns, and I've been studying astrology. Informally, I started 5 years ago, but formally, I've been studying for about 3 years. And I use Hellenistic. I have a Hellenistic background, which is like ancient astrology and stuff like that. But anyone here, I would love to, if you feel comfortable, to just introduce yourself and then maybe give me a little bit about like your background in astrology and like what your comfort level is, so that way when I talk about this stuff, I can kind of like meet you where you're at. Oh, and King Nadir is here. But either Kayla or Turquoise, if you would like, you feel free to introduce yourself. Otherwise, I can just move on.
Yeah, I can go. I'm still a very beginner to astrology, honestly. I kind of only know like the big six and that's it. But I've been hearing a lot of uptick in March energy, so that's why I'm here. And also just kind of listening to your expertise, like that's why I'm here. I'm just really interested to see what you have to say. And yeah, I'm more of I love being a student.
Yeah.
And having a bit more knowledge before I become a teacher.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't think the student feeling ever goes away. Personally,
I know.
I'm like people are like, "Oh, you should teach us stuff," and I'm like, "Oh, I'm a little green for that, don't you think?" Like a lot of my teachers have been studying for like decades, and so I'm just like, nope, I have to wait until I have at least like a certain number of years before I'm like really teaching. But for me right now, I think some of the best ways to learn also is to like teach what you already know. And so that's kind of what I've been trying to do. But hey, King Nadir, did you want to introduce yourself, or are you just here to I guess lurk or just listen? Up to you.
I'm here to listen right now.
Gotcha. Okay.
But hi everybody, I'm Nadir.
Nice to
I
see
got
ya.
Lisa with me.
Hey. Surprise guest. I love that. All right. Turquoise, did you want to introduce yourself, or are you cool? All right, we're cool. We'll move along. All right, so I'm going to share my screen really quick. I took some crazy notes for this. I think I'll do it like so. If at any time my screen like just disappears, please let me know. Oh, actually, question. Oh, I did start the recording. I did. Good. I'm going to move this window. Can you tell me if it's showing or not? Did it go black?
It did go black.
Okay. 1 minute. Let's do it like so. This should fix it. All right. Do you see my screen? Thumbs up. I think everyone's seeing my screen. Gotcha. Thank you so much. All right. So these are all my notes. First, I want to start off with a little land acknowledgement. I didn't do this during my last presentation, and that was kind of an oversight. But so I guess wherever you're at, just acknowledge the land that you're on. I think that would be, I think it's good to remember the history, particularly for myself, because I'm on colonial America, colonized America. So where I'm at in Kansas City, this is occupied territory of Ka, Osage, Sioux, and Kickapoo people. And so I just want to pay respect to the land and the people who steward this land for generations, and pay my respect to elders, both past and present. And then the image I have is of a Sioux man statue overlooking the city of Kansas City, and it was installed to honor the history and the people indigenous to this area. But I have some participants to let in. But we'll go along. Alrighty. Hey, Betty. I'm just getting started, so you just got in here on time. But I'm gonna go over like kind of the bullet points of like everything that's kind of going to happen in March. These are all of the either planetary ingresses, which means when the planets move into a new sign, we call that an ingress. The lunation cycles that are going to be present during the month of March. So these are the full moons and the new moons. And then any notable aspects. So it's not going to be every single aspect because the moon is constantly making new aspects and it'll activate certain degrees or certain energies depending. So I've pointed out anytime it was really notable. I do tend to focus on things that are more contentious or conflict driven because that's the stuff we tend to notice a lot. Not to say there aren't any good aspects happening or trines or like, easier aspects, but my angle when I approach astrology is to give people information so that they can like kind of arm themselves and know how to handle conflict when it arises. If something's coming up that's going to be like easygoing or nice, it's a lot easier to just be like, you'll figure that out. That's not going to like hit you in the same way as like, oh, suddenly now you're butting heads with someone in your life. I can like talk on that and then give you some tools or some information that might help you navigate that. So for the month of March, we have a lunation cycle starting the full moon in Virgo. That's pretty early on. That's going to kind of like kick off some of that energy there. And then we have the new moon in Aries on and the 0 degree. Anytime we have a new moon on the 0 degree, that means we're going to get another new moon in the same sign. So this is kind of like a blue moon moment. It's a very unusual signature. Also, at any time, if you are confused and you would like to ask questions, just interrupt me. Like there's no problem with interrupting me. Because I will just keep talking and I need someone to stop me, and I'm not gonna be worried or offended or like worry about losing my place. I got notes for a reason. So we got the full moon in Virgo. That'll be kind of a fruition culmination of what happened on the 20th of February. So if you're curious about how like what that full moon might be talking about for you, I wrote a new moon article back on the 20th, so you can go back and look at that and kind of get some like insight about what the seed is like, what seed is culminating in your life at that time. So for the planetary ingresses, this is kind of where I feel like the energy shift is really, really potent and like easily observable, particularly since a lot of people have been aware that like intuitively aware that something big is coming for March, like a really big energy shift. And so we see on the 3rd of March, like really early on, we have Mercury moving into Pisces. We have on the 7th, Saturn moving into Pisces, which I've talked about before. On the 17th of March, we have Venus moving into Taurus. On the 19th, we have Mercury moving into Aries. On the 21st, we have the Sun in Aries, and that's the same day as the new moon. And then the big one, and I think this is the one that people are really keying into in a big way, is that Pluto is moving into Aquarius. Pluto is a really slow moving planet, and so when Pluto ingresses into a new sign, it is the only time in our lifetime that we will actually witness Pluto in that sign. So we get to be a part of the Pluto and Aquarius generation that gets to like actually experience Pluto and Aquarius firsthand. We will never, because of Pluto's really long like what's the word cycle or like orbit around the sun, because it's so far away. It takes about 250 years for Pluto to return to a sign in the zodiac. So Pluto and Aquarius is going to bring, I think we're getting a little preview of it now with a lot of the Aquarius energy we've been experiencing over the last few years. But we're really going to see it in a different way when Pluto enters Aquarius. And then on the 26th, to a lesser note, Mars is moving into Cancer, which is also another big energy shift for us because Mars has been in Gemini for a really long time because of his retrograde cycle. And so it's like Mars is going to have a really big dignity change, like kind of like it's going to carry a very different energy signature, and it will be very noticeable, I think. And then we're going to go through some notable aspects. An aspect is basically when a planet is a certain number of degrees away or close to a another planet. I can talk a little more about aspects later. So I'm going to show you this list, and then I think I'm going to pull up the my astrology software so that way you can actually see the aspects and I can kind of describe them for you. But notable aspects, we start the month off on the 2nd with Venus conjunct Jupiter and Chiron in Aries. We have Mercury conjunct Saturn in Aquarius around the same time. So it's like two very different energy signatures. We have this, again, the 7th, we have the full moon in Virgo. And that's going to be squaring Mars in Gemini on the 21st degree. This is like the middle of the month is really chaotic. The middle of the month is like mega chaotic. And you'll feel this energy building up from the full moon, but it's really going to hit the fan, I would say around the 16th, but like from the 13th to the 16th and then a little bit after, we're really going to feel a major conflict coming up with Mars squaring Neptune, conjunct the sun in Pisces. Mars is going to be opposed to the moon in Sagittarius the day after. Mars is going to leave his retrograde shadow shortly after that, which is kind of in a cycle sense a little bit different. We've been dealing with Mars and his post retrograde shadow, so there's going to be this kind of like finishing off of anything that was started, I want to say on the 21st of December. I have to double check that, but I think that's when his retrograde, he entered his pre-retrograde shadow. And then we have Mercury conjunct Neptune, Sun in Pisces on the 16th, which is going to create an even tighter square with Mars that we started with on the 13th. Then on the 17th, Mercury will be Cazimi in Pisces at the 26th degree. We can talk more about Cazimis because that's basically when Mercury or any planet is like directly conjunct the sun. And I can talk more about the signification of that later. We have the first new moon of the month, which is the new moon in Aries on the 21st, like we spoke about. And then the month kind of like after the middle of the month, we kind of like dial back on the aspects. We have it's going to be a little easier going. But we have Mercury conjunct Jupiter in Aries on the 28th. And then the last day of the month, Venus is going to conjoin Uranus and Taurus. So that's all of the aspects that I'm going to speak on. And then let me pull up. Can I change the screen? I might have to stop sharing for this to work. So, I can do a new share. Oh. Hold on. I don't want you to see like every single thing I have open in my tabs right now because that would be embarrassing. I think that's good enough. Let's do this. Okay, so can you see let's see if I can move Zoom. Can y'all see the chart that I have? It's like a big purple screen. Just some thumbs up or.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Let me see if I can get this out of my way so I can actually like view what's going on. I'm going to full screen it. If there's any issues, please let me know. Okay, so this is, I believe right now I have the 16th of November up, which is not the time we need to look at all. Let's update it to now. And then let's go forward like a couple weeks. Yeah. And then we're going to move back a few days. Okay, so here we are at the start of the month. This is my first time showing the actual transits on the screen. So give me a moment. There we go.
Ellie,
Okay.
could you walk through the aspects looking at this chart? Because I'm so curious what that means.
Yeah, aspects in general? Like
Yeah,
what
but
are
like
aspects? How do they work?
How would you look at that on this chart when you explain it to us?
Yeah, can you see my cursor? Because that might help me show
Yeah.
you. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You can see my cursor? Awesome. Because that way I can like
Thanks.
kind of like show you stuff and circle things. I guess I could use my tablet. We're not gonna do that. So you'll see these lines here. So right now, the way I have my software configured is I have a 3-degree orb on every planet. Some planets, depending on their speed, especially the moon, have a different sized orb. But basically, it's when a planet is a certain number of degrees away from another planet in the signs. So you'll see here, I think I can't really see what that I'm looking at. There we go. So let's look for a planetary one. Okay. So at the beginning of the month, we'll actually see that the sun at 10 degrees of Pisces has this green line, which is with the triangle on it, which is a trine to the moon at 8 degrees. So it's within a 3-degree trine of to the moon. And so what that means is basically that this is 120 degrees away, roughly 120 degrees away from the sun. And so based on different shapes, so like for 180 degrees, we have this red line, which is an opposition. For 60 degrees, we have this sextile line, which is signified by that little shape. And then not on this chart, when you cannot see it this time, which I think if I move the days forward, you'll actually be able to see. There we go, there's one. This is when Mars starts to move into, oh, Mars is just opposing the MC and IC, okay. You'll see this red line. So this is 90 degrees away. It's called a square. And so based on the angles of a different shape, so like on a triangle, you're going to have an equilateral triangle, you're going to have 120 degrees. On a hexagon, the angles of the points are going to be 60 degrees. On a square, those angles are going to be 90 degrees. And then an opposition is just a straight line of 180 and bisects the circle. So the whole chart is 360 degrees because it's a circle. And what we're doing is we're basically looking at the shape relationships between planets. And when they have a relationship like that, that means that they're talking to each other. They're doing something to each other. We have whole sign house aspects. So that means the whole sign of Pisces is in a trine relationship to the whole sign of Cancer and the whole sign of Scorpio. And so that's going to be a harmonious relationship. Generally, on my software, the easy relationships are the trines and the sextiles, and they're highlighted in blue. And then the difficult ones, which I believe we had that opposition here, which is just the moon aspecting the descendant and the ascendant, are highlighted in red. And so that opposition and the square are considered difficult aspects. And so based on the degrees the degree relationships they have is basically going to comment on what kind of relationship those planets are having at that time. Does that make sense, Kayla?
Oh yeah, I was like so entranced. You're such a good teacher.
Oh my God. Thank you. I'm glad to help. And then there's the conjunction, which isn't shown by an aspect line because it's just when two planets are on the same degree. So you can see that we're starting the month with the Mercury Saturn conjunction there, and then the Venus and Jupiter conjunction in Aries. And I need to, unfortunately, how do I make this not big so I can see what I'm doing? Oh no, not that. Hold on, I need to move some oh, okay, there it is. Lol. You guys can't see the struggle I'm having right now, and that's probably for the best. That one. There we go. Maybe it's better if I just had, you guys are just gonna see my crazy tabs. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I can live with that. So where am I? Let's start. I have like a whole outline for the month ahead. So like to give you an overview of the month, it's really dynamic. It's crazy action packed. The middle of the month particularly is really high energy. I touched on it here with these particular with the from March 13th to March 16th. That's really high energy, really conflict based. It's a lot of conflict there. It will be noticeable, especially if you have mutable stuff in the like later decan, like the third decan, the 15 to 30 degree area. You're really going to feel the middle of the month for you if you have a lot of prominent planets at those in the mutable signs. And then particularly there's like this tonal shift that we kind of felt with the new moon of like really moving into an energy that is really new and fresh. We've been really dealing with this last hurrah right here of the Saturn in Aquarius, and like how heavy Saturn is when he's in his own sign. And that's kind of like been the last 3 years of our lives. And Saturn will, in the earliest part of the month, move into Pisces. And so we have a lot of Pisces and Aries energy. So there's going to be this focus on probably two aspects of your life. Individually, this is probably going to show up as like two parts of your life having two very different experiences, but like heightened. So kind of like, let's say like at work, like it's kind of like the difference between work and like personal life per se, not necessarily exactly in this scenario, but this is an example. It's kind of like when you have like your work life is going really great and it's like, you know, but let's say you're having a lot of interpersonal issues at home with your partner. So there's two different parts of your life. They're not really in communication with each other per se, but they're both happening and they're both kind of like, I would say like large topics, or they're going to have a lot of focus in this month. And we can look at some charts and see where the Aries and Pisces parts of people's charts are later on, if I can get through everything fast enough. And then see what kind of two parts of the life might be getting like activated as a result. So yeah, we're also, because Saturn is moving out of the fixed sign of Aquarius, it's going to remove a lot of tension and a lot of restriction from the fixed signs. So there's a sudden shift of modality, which is like fixed, the cardinal and the mutable signs, the modality away from the fixed signs and into both the mutable particularly and the cardinal. More the mutable because of the Uranus and not the Uranus, I'm sorry, the Mars and the Gemini, because he's doing a lot of work. I think he's kind of a star this month based on some of the transits and aspects he's making. So yeah, and there are no malefics. The Saturn and Mars are considered malefics. They are considered to bring a lot of like heaviness or like conflict to places wherever they're at. And so they're not in the fixed signs. So they're not making harsh aspects to anything in the fixed signs. So that means it's going to be a little easier for our fixed sign people who have really had it. This last like 3 years has been really rough for them. And then we do have Pluto entering Aquarius, which is kind of like, I think, what people are really keyed into on the March energy, which is going to add a little bit of that back to the fixed signs. But I'm really happy to see Saturn moving out and kind of having a different Saturn energy to look forward to. So I'll put that right there. Let me see, actually. There. Okay, sorry. I have to do some things on my end to like be able to see what's going on. So are there any questions so far about like any of that? And if you don't have questions now, or you want to wait till the end or something, you can put them in the chat. I can't see the chat as it is, so I do want to help if there are any questions that come up. But so because of these Pisces, Aries stelliums, you're just going to have one quadrant of your chart just really like impacted. And so that's going to be an interesting, it's going to be really different than what we've really been experiencing. Let's see. Lots of energetic shifts. We have lots of planetary ingresses and planets moving out of signs. It's not uncommon to see Venus and Mercury and the Sun move a sign, or even Mars moving signs within the same month, but all of them at the same time, and then Saturn and Pluto. Pluto doesn't change signs for at least 20 years, and then Saturn doesn't change signs for at least 2. And so it's kind of a big deal that March suddenly has 2, like the outer planet Pluto and then the furthest visible planet Saturn moving into new signs within the same month. So March is definitely living up to the hype that we've been like hearing and feeling. Mercury in particular, after this final final conjunction with Saturn, is going to be in a really difficult shape. So it's not in a retrograde, it's not going through a retrograde cycle, but it might feel kind of like it. Like Mercury, like if you're going to write something, or you're going to create a communication, or if you're going to try to like even learning and like thinking are going to be kind of complicated and difficult with this month. Right now, Mercury is in the later stages of its retrograde cycle, or not retrograde cycle, I'm sorry, planetary cycle, which is a little different. It kind of brings in the retrograde cycle, but it's a dying old Mercury. Just think of it that way. It's the late end of the cycle. Think of it like a waning crescent, like kind of really on the way out. And it's in Pisces. It's going to be in Pisces shortly thereafter. It's going to be really hurt by being in Pisces. Pisces is a really difficult sign for Mercury to do Mercury things. And it's also co-present with Neptune, which creates more confusion. And then it's going to be square Mars, which creates conflict. So there's a lot of like Mercury stuff. If you're trying to start something that's Mercury based, like intellectual, communicative, thinking, writing, documentation, or like legally binding documents, I would do it. If you have to do something, I would do it before Mercury moves into Pisces, if you can. Obviously, sometimes you can't avoid it, but just be aware that there's going to be like this sense of not being able to like kind of hold everything down or like understand exactly what's going on. And that will clear up, I think, when Mercury moves into Aries later in the month. But yeah, that's kind of the overall like thing. The highlights of the month are again Pluto in Aquarius, Saturn in Pisces, and then the middle of the month, March Madness, which is what I'm calling it, which is really funny because March Madness does start around that time. And it includes Mars, which is the planet of athletics. So I would watch to see if there's any interesting things that happen if you're a basketball fan, to watch March Madness, or even if you like astrology, just to see if anything really like interesting happens around then. Okay. I think that's all of the overview. Again, if there's questions, please stop me or type them and then I can review them later. But first, we're going to start the month off on the 2nd. We see here, we have the Aries Jupiter Venus conjunction happening here. And then we have the Aquarius Saturn and Mercury conjunction happening on the same day, which is interesting. But for Aries and Jupiter, the Jupiter Aries with the Venus conjunction, this is kind of like a really flirty, outgoing, impulsive, passionate, but like go-getter energy. If you've really been feeling like you have more energy to do things, it's probably because we have the benefics in that really like I don't know, I called it top energy, which it's just like a really like energetic signature in a good way. I like this energy. It's going to be nice to experience it over, like we've been kind of feeling it when Aries or when Venus moved into Aries, but this is going to be kind of like really the height of that energy. It's really brash and celebratory. The only thing is that because it's conjunct Chiron, it kind of complicates it. And so there might be like a focus and a healing around a collective wounding of like impulsivity and desire, needing to be the best or most desirable, and then a streak of like intense independence that doesn't allow for give and take. I think we might be able to tap into that a little bit and then like kind of see how we may feel like we have to like dominate situations in love or in relationship, particularly because we have the Venus there. And then on a very different end of the spectrum, we have the Aquarius Saturn Mercury conjunction, which is a very serious-minded, studious. It makes me think of legally binding documents, which is why I would suggest that if you are going to do some documentation or you have to do some legal work, to do it before, like before Mercury moves in. And so this is kind of like one of those moments that might really bring that up. But I think with this being the very final degree of Aquarius, it's going to kind of talk about like it's like a communication and a thinking about the last few years of what Saturn and Aquarius has meant. Saturn has been in Aquarius for like 3 years. And so like it's like reflecting on like how different the world is now since like 3 years ago. I mean, 3 years ago, that's when the pandemic started. That's like, and now like our current state of life, collectively and individually, has gone through a major transformation and a huge like restructuring consolidation, which is a signature of Saturn. So we're gonna like put words to that. It's a good time to think about it. Maybe even just like take the 2nd of March, maybe if you have time, to like really just sit down and like review what's gone on with your life in the last 3 years and like how different maybe the Aquarius part of your chart is depending on where that hits for you. And then right after that, Mercury moves into Pisces, and that's when Mercury really takes a dive in dignity, which is to say that Mercury, it likes to be clear, concise, quick-witted, like like move fast, and likes to is very intellectual in nature. And when you put that energy in Pisces, it's very difficult to be intellectual in a sign that's about like and intellectual and incisive, which is like, like to discrete bits of information to clearly concisely communicate something, when Pisces is about so much the things we can't put into words, the feelings that we feel, a lack of boundaries between what I'm feeling, what other people feeling. The best way that I think Mercury in Pisces shows up is as poetic language, emotional, like really feeling into how the words feel and not exactly what they mean. And that's difficult for Mercury like on the whole, but I think it can be channeled in a positive way, even though people with Mercury and Pisces tend to be people who feel like they can never really get across what it is they're thinking in a way that people they don't feel understood. It tends to have that kind of energy. And then with the Neptune being in the same sign really causes more of that confusion and that inability to really pin down in words or in thought what it is that they're trying to communicate. I would expect a lot of issues with communication in general in a way that makes it feel like Mercury is retrograde almost. All right, and then let's go to the 7th. Yeah. All right, so here we see the full moon in Virgo happening. Opposite Pisces, and this is kind of a tense full moon. I'm gonna do a full write-up on this closer to the full moon itself. I like to do articles talking about the lunations, but the thing that's really showing up here is that this, I don't know if you can see these lines, but we have a full moon is always in opposition. It's always the tension about what is and like what we want and what we wanted to start at the beginning of the cycle on the this cycle started on the 20th of February. So this is like kind of trying to synthesize like what it is that is coming into fruition versus like how we started that cycle or what started the beginning of that cycle. And it's also highlighting the Mars and Neptune square that we've been feeling since like August of last year because of Mars retrograde cycle of going backward and forward and back and forward again. Or forward, back, and forward again. Mars is making a square to Neptune here, as you can see. It's kind of the beginning of the square engagement of with Neptune again. This is the last one, and so it's kind of like this, like in reinvigorating this this storyline we may have started around the beginning of or around August, and then because the moon and has a bigger orb, it's really activating that Mars square. And so it's creating even more tension. So the 7th is going to be kind of where that tension begins to really ramp up. And I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of like from a mundane perspective, like things of like confusion with like taking action or like some sort of like misinformation that creates like conflict or conflict over misinformation or deceit, something about like not being able to hit a bullseye because we can't see it, or we like see a mirage of it and we try to hit that instead. I could see, because Mars is related to war, I could also see this being some sort of like miscalculation around like action taken in war, or like not sure like who took an aggression, or like even the reality that people are fighting about. Like, what is the reality of an argument? Like two people living in a different reality and then both arguing about what is real. Like, it's very that with the Neptune involvement. Let's see. I specifically wrote down inflamed pieces of information, trying to get to the bottom of the facts, but there's a fog of war, confusion around facts, trying to assert self, but something nebulous or potentially deceitful is throwing off your action, acting on ideals of faith, spirituality, and interconnectedness. Yeah, it's giving crusade energy a little bit. There's that feeling with the Neptune Mars square, but yeah. So that's kind of where we start to feel that amp up once more. And then the same day, so it's interesting. We have this kind of 1-2 punch of the moon goes full, it perfects, and then an hour later, like you'll see that Saturn is at the crusty, dusty degree of Aquarius. An hour later, Saturn is going to move into Pisces. And so that's really where I feel like this is going to be another really big energetic shift, where we're taking that, like moving away from Saturn in its own domicile or in its own house of Aquarius, and like moving it into the mutable area. So I wrote down for this, I did do a bigger talk, but that's fucking 3 hours, so we don't have to listen to 3 hours of that. I wrote down a dissolution of emotional boundaries, rigid control of intimacy, finding redemption through suffering, loss, anxiety, and isolation, abstinence from the material world, a deep devotion of a spiritual path, and the harsh reality of all things being interconnected. And then the limits of empathy. So like to kind of sum up Saturn and Pisces, I feel like in a mundane way, it's really going to bring up issues around like the harsh reality of all things being connected, insofar that like, hey, when something happens to the water in particular, because Saturn is moving into Pisces, a water sign, when something is like affecting the fish in the water, I eat the fish and now I'm feeling the same illness the fish was living with. It's very that tangible, like hard tacked reality of the way that things are interconnected, because there's that like Jupiter Pisces feeling of like, oh, I'm just so interconnected with you and I feel you on a spiritual level and like we're all just one, that kind of feeling, versus like Saturn is like, and like here is the physical reality of how everything is connected. Here's how like when you don't take care of, like I think we're going to see a little more of those consequences, particularly around water, and like how do we contain water, or like how do we control water. And water is really hard to like create containers for and control, and so I think there will be some difficulty within the next 2 years around Saturn and Pisces, since he takes about 2 years to move through a sign. Let's see. Yeah, I wrote this down from a podcast I listened to, and I thought it was a really good way of like describing this early stage of Saturn and Pisces as like the realization of the framing of a reality is not the like realizing that the way we have framed reality is not the ultimate reality, and kind of like coming out of the matrix type of energy, like, oh, like the reality I thought I was living, like I actually understand it better as like a construction. So there's that realization, that the recognition, a dawning recognition on the construction of reality. I think Plato's cave allegory, if you aren't familiar with it, is a really good way to talk about Saturn moving into Pisces. So there he is, moved into Pisces. Let's see. Yeah, and that begins the co-presence with Neptune. So there's more of that like nebulousness coming back in, and it adds more of that reality warping. So like I think that I think this could really bring a lot of like maybe hard cold harsh awakenings to people, just because of how Saturn operates. It's very heavy, and it's a restructuring and consolidation of like this part of the chart or the Pisces part of the chart, wherever that is for you. But now we get into the March Madness, so we're gonna move forward a few days. Is there any questions or like anything that people wanted to talk about before I move into like the really dynamic part of the month? Okay. I'm going to talk about this. I've highlighted it because I think it's one of like the parts of the month that are really going to like show up in a big way. So starting on the 13th, Mars is like in a very tightly configured square to Neptune and the Sun in Pisces. Like they're starting to enter engagement range, so they're within 3 degrees of each other. And this square is going to be really present really for the rest of the month, for the latter half of the month. But I think this is when we're going to see it peak and really see it manifest as like conflicts in the world around us, and likely in our personal lives, particularly if we have planets in mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces at the later degrees, 20 to 28 degrees is what my estimate there. Then the moon is coming into an opposition here as well on the 14th, and so continues to add to the aggravation and the inflammation of this. So there's going to be this like, that's a little too far over, but that's fine. There's going to be a like intensification of the moon on the 14th. And then, as you can see, Mercury is starting to move really close to the sun. On the 16th, on the 15th, actually, a notable thing, Mars is going to move out of his post-retrograde shadow. And so that means that when Mars went retrograde back in, I believe it's August of last year, he had reached this degree and then had to get pulled all the way back and has now gone forward again. And this is the first time in months that Mars will have gone over a new part of the Gemini sector of our charts and will be hitting new things. So this is going to, I feel like this conflict is really going to be, this conflict with Neptune here is really going to be like this finality, a finishing of something, or a stage or a phase in our lives around something related to Mars things. So this may have been like kind of like for people with Gemini, well, not just Gemini placements, but wherever Gemini is in your chart, there's kind of been this like rethinking, redoing, reevaluating, getting the facts down, trying to really like pin down what it is you actually might think, or like what the real details and facts are, so you can like make assessments. For me, because I have Aries rising, it's very similar to this chart. For me, just to give a personal example, this has really been about like rethinking the way I communicate, because it's in both Gemini, which is a communicative air sign, and the third house, which is about communication and thinking. And so it's really been about me like rethinking and like undoing or like reevaluating thoughts and beliefs I've had, and gathering new information. So, and like kind of reviewing old information as well. So, and that's been in conversation with my 12th house here with the Neptune doing its Neptune thing. But yeah, then shortly thereafter, around the 16th, Mercury is going to conjoin all of this and basically create a very, it's like right as it perfects, Mercury is going to join the party. So all of that tension will suddenly have a megaphone. So there's going to be a lack of clarity of how to communicate the conflict, but there's still this inflamed agitation and confusion. Again, it's like an inability to agree upon the reality of the argument. So like someone is arguing about apples and you're arguing about bananas, but you're both still arguing. Like, but you're not like you might not be operating with the same facts, if that makes sense. But this part of the month is hot and very dynamic. I think it's going to be interesting because of Mars's relation to athletics, like I mentioned before. I think it is going to be really interesting to look at March Madness and see what comes up. So I'm interested to see what comes up for basketball. I think that'll be interesting. Yeah, tensions high with conflict. I wrote conflict with the collective imagination and ambition and the analytical intellect of the individual will. Losing the individual will to be part of something bigger, fighting with illusion or having a hard time nailing down an argument or disagreement due to not being able to find the ground, period. And then again, I think fog of war is a really great way to discuss Mars-Neptune dynamics in general. Yeah, I think I'm going to move on. But yeah, that's kind of a really big transit for the month. That's the biggest transit of the month, I believe. And then you'll see Venus is in Aries, the last degree. And the next day she's going to move into Taurus. So Venus in Aries has been, actually Venus this month is kind of is sitting a little bit pretty, insofar that she is not really getting any harsh aspects from Mars or Saturn. And she is not, she then enters her own domicile, even though she's present with Uranus and the north node of the moon. I still think that Venus things kind of are more fortunate than, say, Mercury things. Mercury is really taking the heat right now. Or rather, he's drowning under an ocean of feelings and collective subconscious stuff. So when Venus moves into her domicile, or basically her house of Taurus, she's really gonna feel like more at home, and she's gonna be able to operate better for like her own things. So it's gonna really be a less active and competitive and passionate energy than Aries. It's more slow moving, it's sensual, it's earthy, it's steady, reliable, it's stubborn, but Venus sensual pleasures and luxury is gonna be just a little like at this point in the mid-March is gonna be having a nicer time. She's gonna be able to do more of her own thing and be in control of that. Um, and then she's no longer, yeah, because Saturn has moved out of Aquarius, he's no longer hitting the squares. She's no longer going to be hitting squares with Saturn here, so that's kind of nice. No more conflict with restrictions and like social decorum and intellectual idealism. She's going to be able to just do her central thing without having to be guilted by Saturn for it, which I think is kind of a funny way to think about it. Yes, so she will conjunct Uranus later, which I will talk about, but like her co-presence with Uranus here, the god of rebellion and liberation, of unpredictability, sudden change, shocking, electric. There may be some like little revolutions for you in this sense, or even big ones around relationships, sex, an inventive sense of like a new way of maybe approaching relationships could come up for you, or a new way of approaching like even your relationship with food or like values that you hold could come up, and we'll talk about that a little more later, but it starts now. And then we have the Cazimi here with Pisces. So um, does anyone know what a Cazimi is? Okay, so
No.
oh,
No.
no, okay. A cazimi is when the sun and a planet, not including the outer planets or the moon, so anything beyond Saturn, Uranus, not Neptune, and not Pluto, and not the moon. The moon has a different relationship with the sun. But all the other planets, when they come into a perfect alignment like this is only 2 minutes away, a perfect alignment with the sun, we call it cazimi. And that is to say that the sun is now juicing Mercury in a huge way. Like it's like being in the king's throne. With Mercury, it's kind of Mercury is considered in his mythos is the messenger of the gods. And so the sun, Helios, kind of being the king of those gods, is kind of like giving Mercury the ability to exercise power on behalf of him. And so when we see Cazimis happen with Mercury, it's kind of like this really powerful point, and it's a direct conjunction, meaning he's moving a direct motion conjunction. He's moving he's not retrograde. And so this is starting a brand new birth for Mercury. So Mercury goes through this kind of burning up and dying as he gets closer to the sun. In the sky, we call this combust, because the brightness of the sun basically blocks the light of Mercury. And so there's this like dying process and then rebirth process. So this is this rebirth that happens. And so this is like a brand new baby Mercury. And so there's going to be like, I think one thing I think is really like a good what's the word? A good practice for Cazimis, particularly with Mercury, is to set aside like a few hours. For me, it's going to be at 6:40 in the morning because it's a really tight period, like window of time where Mercury is conjunct the sun within like a certain, like not just like next to it, has to be perfectly conjunct. That's when it's considered a cazimi. But I think it's a good time to do like some journaling and get a lot of insight, particularly around like about this beginning of a cycle, and then you can track it until Mercury goes retrograde back again and then through again. I think it just will in a place where there's a lot of lack of clarity. I think here we'll see Mercury with a lot of clarity and sudden realizations, or like there's kind of a power that's granted to him, especially since it's going to be a really big contrast here on this day for those few hours, I think. So yeah, get your journals. That's like the one thing I would say for the 17th is like do some journaling. if you can in the morning, it seems like, but yeah, I'm definitely gonna try. But oh yeah, also, so the Mercury cycle prior started on November 8th in 2022, and that was on the Taurus lunar eclipse. And I find it interesting because we're about to go back into eclipse season as well. And so maybe if you maybe keep a journal, or you can just remember back to early November of last year, it might be a good time to kind of evaluate what was going on during that eclipse season, because this might bring about some like realizations about the completion of that part of that cycle around Mercury, but that's a different thing. Let us move into, all right, I've been going for about an hour and no, only an hour. Yes, I'm making great time. I hope I'm not talking too fast for people. I have my Gemini amulet on, so that might be part of why. But does anyone have any questions about Kazimi's or anything like that? All right. So now we move into Aries season, which honestly, it should be everyone's favorite part of the season. How did I get back here again? That's weird. There we go. So we start Aries season, which like I think we're all familiar with Aries season, but like if we, this part of the month or part of the year, we kind of like are familiar with the way Aries feels, or the sun in Aries feels. But this is the beginning of spring, and it's the vernal equinox, and so there's this like the beginning of a new solar year. It's kind of like the rebirth of the sun, a reemergence. When we talk about the solar year and the solar cycle, we're really thinking about the proportion of dark to light, as in like how many hours is the sun out during the day. And it's darkest at the beginning of Capricorn season. There's the fewest hours of light in the day, and then it is the brightest at the beginning of Cancer season, and so there's the most amount of light during that time. But Aries season is the beginning of when the amount of light during the day is longer than the amount of nighttime, or darkness. So this is kind of like a rebirth, newness. That's a lot of why Aries in the tropical zodiac is associated with new beginnings and initiation, and that fiery spark of something. It's a birth point. And so in a way the sun is kind of being reborn. But yeah, if you practice, what's the word? If you use the wheel of the year, and you celebrate the equinoxes and the oh no, what's the other one? The other one. Oh my gosh, I cannot remember for the life of me. But if you celebrate like seasonal shifts in the year, this, I believe, I forget if it's not Othala, or I'll have to look that up. But again, a birth point. And then we're gonna immediately, a few hours after this, I believe, we're gonna have a new moon in Aries right here. Actually, whoa, I didn't know I could do that. We're learning today. So the interesting thing about this new moon in Aries is because it's happening on basically the 0 degree line, or the very first degree, the 0 degree of Aries, we are going to have another new moon in Aries, which is it's a true blue moon. So at the very tail end of Aries, right next to the nodes, we're going to have another new moon, which will make it a solar eclipse. And so this is kind of a preview for that solar eclipse that's coming at the end of the month, or not the end of the month, I'm sorry, on the 19th of April. So yeah, right before the end of Aries season next month. This one's going to be very different though, because the eclipse is going to be very different because Mars is going to shift signs, and because Mars is the ruler of Aries, it's going to be kind of tonally different than this one. But I think I think it's a good one to watch for, to see what kind of repeat of significations or like topics come up for you around the 21st of March. Let's see. So for anyone who uses the moon for manifestation, I think this is actually a really great time to do that, because the sun, while still in a square engagement with Mars, is now in the sign of Mars, and so is in more alignment with Martian topics. And in a positive way, squares can generate a lot of energy. Squares are of the nature of Mars as well, and so they may be conflict driven, but there are places where conflict is put on high and exalted. So I think this is going to be great, and it's away from Neptune. It's out of sign of Neptune, and Mars, while still in the square with Neptune, is like really separating from that, and so it's more of a rear view tonal thing. For Mars, so for Martian intentions for this new moon, and I would suggest using this new moon as opposed to the eclipse. The eclipse energy is going to be it's kind of like if you're like, hey, I want some energy. I'm gonna go put a fork in a light socket. That's one way to get energy, but it's not advisable, and it's not something that's easily controlled. I don't recommend manifesting or trying to put intentions into an eclipse. It's better to see what the universe brings, and to kind of go with the flow. But for this new moon, because we get two, I would suggest that if you're interested in athletics, debate, combat, competition, doing something with speed, heavy workouts, stints, and achievements, cutting through an obstacle, or doing something with boldness and decisiveness is really a good way to harness this new moon and use it to your advantage. So if you are into manifesting, I would say that if it's Mars related or Gemini related, yeah, because Gemini has moved into, or Mercury has moved into Aries, so that's a lot better for Mercury. Mercury's doing a lot better now. Though he is still combust, he is growing in power, so that's kind of nice. It's not, I would say this new moon is actually pretty stellar for doing some of
Allie,
that.
what is the date of this manifestation day?
Oh, it's the 21st.
Okay, so it's still on spring. Awesome.
Yeah, it's at the vernal equinox. So you're not only using the new moon itself as like any new moon, you're also using the power of the vernal equinox as well, because it's the first day the sun enters Aries. So you're using the power of the solar year, the new solar year. You're using the power of the new moon. You're using the strength and the tension and the friction, the heat created by the square of Mars to this new moon, who rules this new moon, and Mars is now outside of or is now gone past his post retrograde, so now it's something new with Martian energy that you can do. And I suggest using this one in particular, not only because the next Aries new moon is going to be an eclipse. Mars will also be in Cancer, which is a huge dignity shift for Mars. Mars is not going to be able to do the Martian things he likes to do as much. He has to do them with things that are more emotional, caring, and like soft and like impressionistic and personal, which is not Mars at all. Mars does not do very like Martian-y things exactly the way you would expect in Cancer. And so it's more moody. I call Mars in Cancer mama bear energy. That's really my like go-to archetypal image for Mars in Cancer. But here I think it's a great time to use this new moon in particular. And it's really another, just like there's so much initiating energy in this month. This is another signature of just like explosive and initiating energy, really trying to put vigor and like oomph into like getting out of old energy and get into something new. And we also have like a crazy Aries stellium happening here too. Um, just lots of good stuff. I quite like this new moon particularly. But yeah, so now we get into kind of like the next big portion of, oh, not hours, we want days. We get into the next really big, there we go. We're getting to the next big transit, or like the ingress of the month, which I've highlighted. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at because this is going to be huge. But we have up here Pluto entering Aquarius. And this is energetically a really huge shift. I think this is what everyone's talking about in March. I mean, there's lots of initiatory energy happening in March, but like this is going to be like a huge tonal shift, a huge like focus shift on Pluto. Pluto as a planet, as far away and distant as Pluto is, Pluto really talks about like our hidden fears coming to the surface, a collective, like usually in a collective sense. You'll see this, I think, show up in a number of different ways. And I think we're seeing kind of the preview of that as Pluto is moving through the last degree of Aquarius, or not Aquarius, I'm sorry, Capricorn, and like kind of setting up the next Aquarian like phase for himself. And I think we see that now when we talk about like we're talking about AI and like, okay, what are the limits of AI? Like what they're starting to become eerily human. They're starting to do things that only humans could do. They're we're talking about aliens a lot more. Aquarius has a signature, like aliens are a delineation associated with Aquarius because Aquarius as a sign deals with like the decision of what is inside the boundary or the border and versus what is outside that boundary or border. Whereas Capricorn is, as a Saturn's ruled sign, is more about, okay, like how do I actually physically build something and the structures and like the earthy way of doing that versus Aquarius, which is the thinking. It's the human putting lines on a map that create like boundaries, but those boundaries are essentially ideas. It's also very social in nature, and so yeah, but Pluto as a planet often relates to the horror genre. So I think watching horror movies and like what kind of horror movies are coming up and becoming popular is going to really key into Pluto and Aquarius. So we might see more fear around aliens and invasion. And alien can also refer to like, you know, what we think of as foreign or like, you know, that fear of people from outside coming in. Though I think it's going to be aliens in particular. So I wonder what kind of disclosure or information may be revealed to us as Pluto takes the god of the underworld, takes that stuff from the underworld and basically volcanically erupts it into our consciousness. It's also related to collective and unconscious fears. And so, yeah, the AI thing is going to come up. And again, like I think for Aquarius as a very future looking sign, it's about like looking at the past to see how we progress into the future, or like how do we configure the future socially to have a better future or a golden future. And so there's going to be horrors around the unknowns of the future. Pluto is an invisible planet. It's not something that we can see, so it's often related to things that lay in the subconscious. So the unknowns of the future, socially, technologically, and then like I wrote science fantasy of societal breakdown. So I think we'll see a lot more like dystopian type of like sci-fi topics and like archetypes show up for us and like kind of exposing the underbelly of like what we do with technology. And I think a way we're really seeing that show up is like how AI is like digging into the collective, all of the collective stuff on the internet that we've been putting up there for the last 30 years and like processing it and then spitting it back out at us. It's like it's mimicking everything that we've put on the internet and it's only reflecting back to us what we've like what we have in our like I called it the skeletons of our Aquarius closet. And it's like kind of the gross underbelly of the internet and in an interesting way that we're interfacing with it as it becomes more human and the kind of the horror of it becoming more human is kind of interesting because Aquarius as a symbol is the water bearer and it's one of the 4 signs that has a human as its symbol as opposed to like the other ones which are largely animals, and then Libra, which is an inanimate object. Let's see. Also, Pluto tends to bring permanent change. Think about the how Pluto has been moving through Capricorn and how it's really been focusing us on our infrastructure and what the like the structures of that we rely on for like our social good. This is gonna, I think, bring a lot of permanent changes. in social structures and like thought and ideals about the future. And it's also going to, I think, we're going to see like kind of like a keying up of like mass surveillance, because Pluto also as a planet is associated with domination and control. And Aquarius is kind of about like a sign of social structures and like how do we govern ourselves. It's very related to that. A lot of politicians have strong Aquarius signatures, and that's part of why. And so I can see mass surveillance coming up. One thing that I think is potentially positive, even though Pluto tends to bring up our fears and like those ugly things, one potential positive is that a lot of scientific discoveries and breakthroughs could create improvements for our lives. But it brings up topics like gene editing and transhumanism in general, and like the meaning of being human. And so I think we're gonna have to what's the word? Wrangle with that, kind of tussle with that a little bit. What else? Oh yes. And so I have some notes about like the last Pluto and Aquarius cycle. So I like, especially with these big outer planet transits of, you know, Pluto, where we have never lived through a Pluto and Aquarius transit because it takes too damn long. We can go, but we can look at the past and see what like kind of events happened last time Pluto was in Aquarius. So last Pluto in Aquarius, we actually had Uranus and Gemini, and we will have Uranus and Gemini moving into Gemini in 2025. So there's going to be, I think, a similar signature happening to this 17th or 1777 to 1779 Pluto in Aquarius we had back like a few centuries ago. Let's see. So that's like that last Pluto in Aquarius transit is the peak of the Enlightenment. There's a revolution of thought towards reason and logic. This is the time of the French Revolution, so there's the abolition of the feudal system, and they even I thought this was funny. There's just so much reason happening in this. State-sponsored atheist religion called the Cult of Reason happening in France. The American Civil War really takes place during Pluto and Aquarius. So we just had the Pluto return of the United States in Capricorn. And so I think we could see potentially a kind of replaying or reimagining, not imagining, what's the word? Like a rhyming of that in the future. So America declared its independence at the anaretic degree or the last degree of Capricorn, but like the Bill of Rights is written under the Pluto and Aquarius transit. The Industrial Revolution, so that's again a revolution of technology. And so I think we could see a lot of that happening, especially when Uranus in 2025 moves into Gemini. This is the beginning of the opposition to slavery in the States, though it's not fully ratified, I believe, until Pluto moves into Pisces, which makes sense on Pisces being that empathetic sign. And then philosophically, there's just a huge focus on reason. Is it Immanuel Kant? I forget which Kant I'm talking about. And then like Thomas Paine both have like essays and treaties on reason and like, you know, the limits of reason, like how to use reason to its benefit, and utilitarianism on basically like the most what's the word? The least emotional and rational and logical way of benefiting humanity is kind of how I feel about utilitarianism. Also, for a historical figure born during this time, Mary Shelley, if you don't know her, she wrote Frankenstein. And so it kind of brings up again that like the monstrosity of science. And specifically because of Uranus being in Gemini, I felt like Frankenstein as a figure is a monster of the scientific rebellion against death, which makes so much sense, I think, for when with Uranus in Gemini trine Pluto in Aquarius at that time. So like defying death, like how maybe we go too far with scientific progress to improve humanity and things of that nature. So that's Pluto and Aquarius. That's what I have for Pluto and Aquarius. Is there any questions about Pluto and Aquarius? I think later, if I have some time, I should have enough time because we're about to wrap up. That's kind of the biggest shift of the month that we have. But we can look at where Pluto might be hitting in your chart and you're in Aquarius for you if you're interested, and then kind of like look at like what kind of part of your chart is going to be reconfigured, transformed, and like kind of reborn through Pluto, or like what dark underbelly of your life might get exposed during a Pluto transit. But are there any questions? Okay, I'm going to assume I'm doing a good job because I'm not hearing anything. So then on the 25th, the day after, Mars shortly moves into Cancer. So Mars in Cancer is considered in detriment. And so it's considered to not be able to do Martian things as easily. The signatures of Cancer are not conducive to the actions that Mars likes to take. Cancer in and of itself is considered a very secure, emotional, like creating emotional containers to hold people in. There's a mothering aspect to Cancer. There's a sense of impression, like sensitivity, and empathy in Cancer. It's watery. Not that the other water signs don't have, like, I mean, Scorpio is a water sign as well, but Scorpio has a very different approach to water as opposed to Cancer. And so Mars can find himself a little frustrated here. It can be kind of a passive aggressive, moody defensive-ness. There can be positively a proactive need to create security because Cancer is if we think of the animal Cancer, the crab has that shell, and being secure and like protected is kind of part of Cancer's signature. So you can use Mars energy to do that. It can be overly passionate when providing care or like even like an emotional ear. One of my favorite Mars and Cancer like ways to talk like examples is like when I think it was Tyra Banks on America's Next Top Model was like yelling at this one girl, like, "We were all rooting for you," and really aggressively like supporting her. It's kind of that energy. And also again, I think I mentioned mama bear energy earlier. So there are positive expressions of Mars and Cancer, but Mars as a planet finds it hard to do Martian things with Cancer topics, if that makes sense. So where Cancer is in your chart, Mars tends to bring conflict to wherever he's touching. And so you might find conflict in like the personal emotional arena, and especially so because he's going to pass through multiple squares with this Aries stellium and right here. The beginning of this transit, however, he is passing through a trine with Saturn. And so there may be some sort of Saturn might be able to calm Mars down and keep Mars in check for the beginning of this transit, and kind of like what's the word, like positive restriction controlled exercised over Mars. And so there can be like you want to do that passive aggressive thing, or you want to lash out emotionally, and your Saturn in Pisces is like, okay, hold on, maybe we don't have to do that. Let us like maybe just let's write it out in our journal and like get it out that way, and then we can like reevaluate from there. But the one nice thing about Mars moving into Cancer, besides like mama bear energy, I think, is that he will get out of the square with Neptune, like by sign. And so that tension that Mars is feeling with this Neptune here and that fog of war and confusion, Mars leaves. And so the next challenge is dealing with Mars and Cancer, but I think it's a lot nicer than having this confusion here. At least when Mars is square with any of these other planets in Aries, the Sun, Mercury, or Jupiter. Though I don't know if he'll be actually come into square with Mercury because Mercury moves faster. At least the Sun and Jupiter. At least you'll understand the conflict more concretely, right? Let's see. And then briefly you'll see here on the 28th. So we're wrapping up the month. We're almost done here. And then I can answer any questions or like provide clarity and anything like that. But the 28th, we have Mercury conjunct Jupiter here. And so I like, this is kind of a quick moving, like fast transit. It's not something that's going to stick around for a long time, but if you have any public speaking or like really like, I feel like we're going to see some emotional testimonies and like speeches being given. A motivational speech is definitely on the table for this Mercury conjunct Jupiter. And individually though, it may manifest as like an emotional fight with a loved one because of its rulership here with Cancer, and then the moon conjunct as well. So with a loved one, even potentially a caregiver, or even mom potentially, but depends. It's really going to depend on your chart. But archetypically, so I don't know, is kind of what we're dealing with. And then the last day of the month on the 30th, that's when we get the Uranus and Venus conjunction. Here I feel like it's going to be like a sudden innovation of values, and it could germinate as a spontaneous protest potentially, like in a mundane way, like out in the world. Some things you might see are people rebelling against things, or like from a personal value set for social good, particularly about earthy things like Taurus things, which is like we've seen Uranus and Taurus really really mess with food supply chains. Venus here is often associated with social values, and can often talk about human rights and things of that nature. And so I feel like with the Uranus, this conjunction here, not really being aspected by anything other than just it being itself, could really show up as some sort of like spontaneous change to Taurus topics in our life. And it could also like rock our relationships and on an individual level in both good and difficult ways. I've written down breakthroughs around love, sex, food, sensual pleasure, earthly goods, and money. So yeah, that's how we round out the month with Venus in Taurus conjunct Uranus. But that's the whole month, you guys. I like powered through that. Thank you for sticking around. I'm actually going to, I could continue to share. But yeah, are there any questions or anything that anyone wanted to talk about in particular that was covered? Or go over charts and look at some transits that people feel like they're gonna really want to know more about?
Hey, Allie, I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was wondering about Pluto. You were saying it's a planet,
Mm-hmm.
and I know like a few years ago they were like, oh, it's not a planet anymore. So I was just like wondering like some clarity on that.
Yeah, so okay, so in astrology, like Pluto is still considered a planet in astrology, but even in astrology, the sun and the moon are considered planets. The or what's the word? The not the term, the origin of the terminology, or the origin of the word planet, means wandering star in Greek, I believe. So it's basically any planetary or heavenly body that moves around in the sky. And so like there are some like asteroids like Chiron that still have significant influence in their chart that I use. Pluto can kind of be considered something similar. But I think sometimes astronomers and astrologers have different ways of classifying planets for our different purposes. So yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. Let me, I'm not sure if anyone does want to look at their chart, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I think we're at the end of our presentation, or at least my presentation. Is there anything that was confusing to anybody? I'm actually going to look at some chat to see if anything showed up.
Hi.
Howdy.
Okay, so I kind of want to look at my chart. I'm a newcomer and I'm still
Yeah.
just about it. I've looked up my house before, my houses and my rising. And And my biggest thing was even with Pluto recently, because I was looking it up. I feel like lately I've been going through this weird rebirth death thing. So when I was waiting for you to start talking about Pluto, kind of in a sense, and the changes with, because I know a lot of people consider Pluto like death.
Yeah.
Like it's a strong kind of planet star or whatever. That's kind of where I was like with my chart. How does that relate with me?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have your birth time available?
Yes, 5:45 p.m.
Awesome. Okay. What shall I name the chart? What's your name?
Nisa.
Nisa. Oh yeah, I've seen you.
Hi.
I've seen you around. All right. Let's do this. Your birthday?
April 13, 1989.
1989. And then, oh, you just gave me the time. What was that?
5:45 p.m.
5:45 p.m. And then where are you born?
Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn. All right. Let's give it a looky-loo. Let's see. Ta-da. Okay, so are you an Aries? Oh, not Aries rising. Sorry, I have to change some of my settings really quick to show your chart more accurately. So I'm going to assume that likely you've seen your chart in Placidus.
I seen it in CoStar and Astro Sofa.
Yeah, that's going to probably be Placidus. Those are the default. That's the oh, it's actually going to be pretty close too. That's the default house system. So there are different ways of basically cutting the pie of the sky. I use whole sign houses, which is a little bit different than Placidus or some of the other systems. So the way that whole sign houses defines your houses is that your rising sign becomes the first whole sign house of your chart, and then the sign after becomes the second, the sign after that third, and so on and so forth. So you are early degrees Libra rising. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So for you, my darling, that puts it in the 5th house. Let me put the transits up so I can see what's going on here. Oh, interesting. Okay. Can I? So we have that ingress on the 24th, I believe. If I'm remembering correctly. Yes. Okay. So this is going to be transiting the whole sign 5th house of your chart, and that's putting some pressure on your fixed signs here. So you have natally, like many people in our generation, the Pluto and Scorpio. And so you're actually going through Pluto is or transiting Pluto is going to square your natal Pluto, which is going to be interesting. And I think for you, part of this recent Capricorn Pluto transit is because you have this pile up here of Neptune, Saturn, and Uranus in Capricorn, and you recently, I want to say about 5 years ago, I went through your Saturn return as well. So the last few years have really been rocky, but this has really been a big transformation. In the most personal part of the chart is the 4th house. So this is going to be dealing with your family of origin, your like the history of your family, the things you've inherited from your family, and the family dynamic in a lot of ways. It's like your private self versus the 1st house, which is kind of like the way you appear on the surface, and then kind of how you walk through the world. So if it's really been like a lot for you, it's likely because of that. It's also been sitting on your descendant degree right here, and not necessarily by sign, but like by degree is opposing your moon as well. And so you're going to feel that moon opposition even a little more so because you have that natal moon here in the 11th house. So I think when I see the 5th house with Pluto, it could bring up some underbelly for this Pluto in Aquarius. So you've been dealing with the Pluto in Capricorn, but for the future, I'm seeing like this transformation and like deep pulling up of like the instincts and the underbelly of like your pleasure. I feel like Pluto often talks about sex, just because of the nature of the things we find taboo, and Pluto, it talks about what we find taboo and the things that we'd like to keep in the closet or our skeleton. So there might be some conversation about like what it is that you find pleasurable, why do you find it pleasurable, desires or creative impulses that are coming from underneath. And it might be in some conflict here with, it might run into conflict probably about, I want to say, well, if we're going to be dealing with this, it's going to be 10 years. You're not going to really feel this Pluto square for another 10 years or more, because of the nature of how long Pluto takes. But you'll definitely be feeling it immediately. You've already been feeling it, but you're going to feel it more intensely as Pluto moves through this opposition with your natal moon here. And oh wow. Oh, you have a, oh, okay. And so that you also have a natal Mercury on the 4th degree, which makes it square your natal moon. And so that's going to activate that square in a big way and kind of create this like transiting T-square, which is considered a kind of like being in between a rock and a hard place. And so there might be something about like something you're communicating or like your communication style, even like other people's ways they think about you or talk about you, and perhaps it could be it might be related to your mom. This is a Pluto opposition to your moon. I use the moon as a symbol for mom, usually biological mother or a caregiver, coming up here. So there might be some like ways that happens. It could also be around the topic of organizations, friends, and groups. And so maybe something about the family of origin and like relationships you've developed, and networks you've developed around the family of origin having some sort of conflict here with things that are coming up for you around the topic of creative pursuits, pleasures. And the 5th house is also significant, or signifies children. I don't know if you have any children, but it could be a conflict point that comes up around that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, good.
Caregiver, it's not mama bear for me. I feel like it's recently been papa bear in a way, because it's a situation that I'm going through with my father.
Got it.
It has me in the rock and a hard place.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, also Saturn often can talk about father. Usually, sometimes they'll talk about father with some sort of like weakness or illness sometimes. But I'm trying to see here. You have the, I'm sorry?
That's exactly what's going on.
Oh, okay. So I think was your Saturn return potentially was related to some of that topic with father. I'm looking to see where your sun is, because sun can also be used. Oh, your birthday's coming up. That's so exciting. I also use the sun as father here, but it's also like life ambition and goals. Oh, I forgot I could do that. Beep. I could have been doing that the whole time. I could have made things a lot less confusing for everybody. Lol. All right. But I don't know if there's anything else I can say right now. But your moon has a big orb, so you're going to be feeling this until like this sort of like family conflict. I'm going to assume this is family conflict, especially since you have the Saturn here ruling both of these signs in Capricorn itself. That you're probably going to feel this, and then for the next it could be a 10-year thing. Right now it's going to be more potent for you. And then the Pluto square is going to come up, and I think that's going to be potentially, I don't know if volcanic is the right word, but like stuff is going to get dug up and it's going to feel interesting. Pluto squares are not fun things to go through generally. But the thing that I love about Pluto, and a great way to honor Pluto, I think, is to remember that it's, oh, I guess I'll add this person. A great way to honor Pluto is to understand that the purpose of Pluto is to bring up and purge anything. So like if you get sick, you get food poison, like you need to throw that stuff up. And so Pluto is going to take that poison out of you. But it's not, the throwing up's not the fun part, but the relief and the what's the word? The catharsis of Pluto. Whoa. Maybe spirit was like, pay attention. This is the important part. The
As
catharsis.
talking about it, like an image of Kali Ma came in, and I'm
Absolutely.
not familiar with Kali Ma, and she's like, so many people are feared with her, and I'm a little bit familiar with her. So as you're saying that, I heard Kali Ma, and then my phone falls down. I'm like, okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Kali Ma too. Dark mothers, gotta love them. But yeah,
Yes.
this could be a dark mother energy as well, the Pluto opposite the moon here. But like you're gonna feel that really acutely for the next few years, and then less so moving into the square. But that's gonna like, I think based on that, like that transition of the from the moon to the Pluto square, it's gonna really feel like this event, I think, within the family creates a purgative, like will trigger a new purge. Like it'll kind of like, you'll think like you dug up everything, and then you'll go through the purge because then it's interacting with your personal values here in the second house. And then it's gonna like trigger that, like, oh, okay, now I understand this. And so there might be could also talk about some money stuff happening in the second house, and then the needing to give away things to open up space either creatively or for new pursuits potentially. But yeah.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
super welcome. Did anyone else want their chart looked at before we wrap up this talk? You want to? Okay. Come on, Nadir.
Yes. Go ahead.
All right, let me open up a new chart. And also, thank you for sharing your chart with me, Nisa. It's an honor that people let me look at their charts and let me like use them as a learning tool, and then also like trust me with that information because it's really personal.
I mean, that's why I'm here, is to get help and all that. I can't really be too scared and standoffish and be like, no, that's personal. How else are you gonna get help then? Like, to learn, I felt like.
I gotcha. All right, Nadir. Am I pronouncing that right?
Nadia, yes.
Nadir? Okay. Is that the one? There we go. When was your birthday? Do you have your birth time by chance? Just to make sure.
Yes. Hold on. Let me make sure to give you it perfectly.
I do like clean data as an astrologer.
Yes, I know. Will I find it out again?
Oh, just for everybody who's here right now, while you're looking that information up, I would love any feedback that you have, and like any way that like anything that was interesting or shocking or like notable for you, or if anything you've learned, I would love some feedback in any way I can like improve the transmission of information, because I feel like I just threw a lot of stuff at people. And hopefully that wasn't like confusing or overwhelming. So that's what I'm trying to like figure out as I like transmit this information.
7:57 a.m.
7:57 a.m. I know that's a real birth time. All right, what is your birthday?
11/24/1991.
Okay, let's do it. And then your where were you born?
Queens, New York.
Queens. There we go. Okay. Oh, we got a Sag rising. That makes sense. Let's see. And now let's add the. Where are my charts? Where are transits? There we are. Okay, so the inner wheel is your chart. And then we're going to look at. Are we looking at Pluto and Aquarius?
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, so that's gonna put Pluto in your third house here. And that's already in conversation with your Saturn and Aquarius early degrees, which congrats on getting through your Saturn return. I feel like I wonder if that was like a big awakening for you. But yes, so like all of that Saturn return stuff, like go back about 3 years and like what was going on in your life. Pluto is gonna bring up more of that stuff, but it's gonna be it's gonna like make sure that you've really like digested and then like gotten rid of anything left over. I feel like because Saturn is a reconsolidator. He's gonna restructure, reorganize. He's gonna make sure that you're on top of stuff. Otherwise, you're gonna have consequences for it. And then for Pluto's gonna be like, okay, but did you like look underneath the hood? Did you like, are you getting out all of the grime? Are you taking a really honest and maybe even painful look about some of that stuff? So I think just to get like familiar with what the topics were, I would just go back. If you keep a journal, that's wonderful. I try to keep a journal of just like the mundane things that happen in my life and like what's going on certain days, just so I can go back astrologically and like look and be like, oh, that's what was happening for me at that time. Okay, now I can like bring that knowledge in and then review it, how it's going to kind of like come up for me. I feel like the last few months have probably already been kind of ramping that up. You've kind of been like getting that hint from Pluto for the last like, I want to say probably 6 months or so. Also, oh, that's an interesting. Sorry, I'm like trying not to get lost in your chart too much because sometimes I get like, ooh, what was that? I get shiny object syndrome. What I think that's probably going to be the most potent part for you because nothing else is really aspecting this except for your sun, which is a sextile. I feel like whatever Pluto is going to bring up for you around the third house, there may be something coming up around a. Do you have any siblings? Okay. Are they older than you?
2 of them.
Okay, so you have 2 siblings who are older than you. I say that because Saturn in the sign of siblings, or not the sign, the house of siblings, is often related to older siblings, elders. Are they significantly older than you? No? Okay. I was just wondering. Oh, actually, I can see. Oh, I can see why. They're actually okay. So it's going to talk to your son as well, but I feel like whatever this is going to bring up for you around the topic of siblings, your thoughts and communication, your environment, and the way your environment is going to impact the way you think. I think maybe you've really been coming into contact with that with your Saturn return about like, oh, there's so much stuff that I'm letting into my thought space and in my physical space even that's like affecting the way that I think and like actually creating like, if I'm not diligent and like structured about what I allow into my environment, I'm not actually keeping an eye. I'm not being responsible with like my thought space.
Mhm.
So there might be something of that comes up. Oh, Isabel. I'm not Isabel in. That comes up for you. And Pluto is gonna like, I feel like Pluto's gonna talk about why. But if you've done your work from your Saturn return, I don't feel like this is going to be like as heavy, but I expect the next 5 or so years for you to be kind of like a little bit harder, a little bit heavier with the Pluto activating your Saturn. But that heaviness and again, the purging quality of Saturn, or not Saturn, I'm sorry, of a Pluto. Here, actually, I'm gonna boop. Oh, that's so beautiful. I love this stuff. But that purgative quality of Pluto around this stuff, it's gonna help you kind of like step into an identity of yourself that's in alignment with your ambition, is what I want to say. Sun in the first house is really like, how do I embody me? What's my ambition is to be myself, and like it's my fullest, most authentic way. The sun is often about authenticity, personal ambition, and like the what our drives are for like the ideal of our life. And so I feel like this is going to be actually a really helpful thing, even though it's difficult. And that energy is heavy, that heaviness is coming up to get purged. It's going to really lighten your load here and add a little bit of like, oh, okay, now I see that I was carrying all this stuff, all this thinking. I think there may be like some new something coming up from the subconscious of like how am I thinking? What are my beliefs? That's going to come up and you can actually see it. And before you couldn't see it. And it'll be up to the surface. So you have to, it might not be nice ways of thinking. You might have to be confronted with like your difficult beliefs and difficult thoughts. And there might be some invasiveness of thought happening there as well, but it's coming up to be witnessed and then let go. And that's just going to lighten the sun's load a whole bunch. At least that's what I'm picking up for you. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Astrologer good, I think.
On the spot.
What?
Like on the spot.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm glad I could help with that. Is there anybody else that wanted? I have, what time is it? I have about, I don't know how much time I put in. I think I put in 2 hours. So I have about 10 more minutes-ish to look at charts. Did anyone else want a chart looked at really briefly? All right. Oh, I see Isabel. Yeah, absolutely, Isabel. If you don't want to come on mic, that's totally fine. You can unmute yourself if you like. But if you want to either type your birth chart info, that would be great. And thank you so much, Canacia. I'll see you later. Thanks for coming.
Sorry, do you need like a time, my birth time and
I do.
date? Okay,
I do.
February 7th, 1990. Okay.
Oh, have I done a birth have I looked at your birth chart with my full moon, new moon?
I don't think so.
I have another Isabel in there. Let me double check to make sure it's not you.
Okay.
Not you. Okay. Different Isabel. All right. So you said February 19th?
No, February 7th.
7th. Happy
Yeah.
belated birthday.
Oh yeah, thank you. 1998.
All right. Oh, that was in the wrong tab. Oh, 7th, 1998, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. And then what time?
2:16 a.m.
AM babies. I love early morning babies. I think you're Aries rising?
I think I'm a Scorpio rising, unless
Really?
I've been wrong my whole life.
Oh my God. We'll find
I
out.
could've-
Are you where were you born?
Salt Lake City, Utah.
Utah, Salt
Yeah.
Lake. I just watched Under the Banner of Heaven, which is a show about Mormons, and like all of the Lafferty drama that happened. It's heavy. I wouldn't suggest it unless you have a stomach for it. But does this look? Yes, you are Scorpio rising. Where did I get? It might just be your location that's changing it. Usually early morning, I tend to see like Aries stuff, but maybe that's just me and my chart. Okay. Let me see. Let's add, are we looking at the Pluto Aquarius or is there another transit? Oh, you came in late. I don't know if you were around for the other transit talk.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Just I'm not sure. I did come in late, so whatever you want to look at.
No worries. Okay, let's look at, I think we'll continue with the Mars. Oh, bye, Keela. We'll continue with the Mars stuff, and then I think after that we'll call it a day because I don't think there will be anything left.
Okay.
Or not the Mars stuff. I'm sorry. Maybe I should look at the Mars stuff for you. Maybe that's why I said it that way. Let's see. No, no, okay. I was wondering if like Mars was gonna be like hot for you. It was hot for you. Earlier in the retrograde cycle, that was heavy.
Oh.
conflict stuff with around like I want to say personal preferences and like or potentially like create like pleasure seeking or like hobby. I don't know, it's interesting because sometimes the fifth house can also talk about children if you have kids, maybe some difficulty there. And it was right on you have a very interesting Mars placement. We could talk about it another time. I don't want to get too distracted. But
Okay.
oh wow, you have a lot of stuff happening in Aquarius. I expect, and it's all in your fourth house. Where's Saturn? And you have the Saturn in Aries. Okay. All right. So right now you're feeling a lot of heaviness here. Kind of like there's going to be kind of like this little boost that comes over to the Saturn and Aries in the sixth house. When I see the sixth house, and then this is a pretty old. Oh, that's no, that's like a old cycle. Yeah, that's an older cycle of Saturn. I feel like right now you're kind of getting like bolstered by this like I don't know why I'm being drawn to this by like the stellium happening on top of your Saturn. I feel like this is kind of like there might be a lot of energy and stuff going into like labor and routine and like trying to just keep things running right now for you. And I wonder if like it's kind of giving you like some awareness around like the structures that you build to like keep, day-to-day life on the wheels. But it's interesting because I'm looking at it because it's ruling this stellium you have here of the Mercury, the Uranus, the Neptune, and your Aquarius sun. So this is a really big conversation that's happening between your natal planets and Pluto that's currently or is shortly going to be conjunct Neptune. And I see it's happening in your fourth house, which is again, like I mentioned it as the private life, the family of origin, your roots, the things that kind of you inherit from your, I want to say matrilineage specifically, because it's like kind of where the birthing point and how like, I think of it as the, how the body is from our mothers. And so if we're birthed from mom, the first body that we have like intimate connection with is going to be our mothers. And so it's a lot of the things we inherit through the body are going to be from mother, though I do see the sun here, so that could also talk about father. Let me see what, okay. Yeah. And then it's the Chiron here in the first house. But I feel like there may be some like, I wonder if you've had some health issues growing up related to maybe like a hotness of the skin or like something with the bones potentially. If that doesn't connect at all, don't worry about it. It's kind of there's a bit of a medical astrology thing that I'm going off of with Saturn in the sixth house. Sometimes Saturn brings up illnesses related to the bones and skin. Does that connect, or am I completely off?
No, I don't have anything related to that.
Okay, awesome. I'm glad. Because sometimes when I see Saturn in the sixth, there's like that could be the issue. Though I wonder if like maintaining the structure of like routines might be difficult. Or you run into conflict with like we run into conflict with elders or like authority figures.
Yes, that is very much true.
Okay. So yeah, sometimes I ask about the body for the sixth house because often with the sixth house, especially since you're a chart ruler, it's connected to your first house, that sometimes it's about like your physical body, or because it's connected to the first house, it could also be like how your personality is in conflict with elders or authority figures or restriction in general. So you might rebel against like a routine, even like you're like, I can't have a routine, that's too much.
Yeah, restriction in general. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And so there might be a lot of stuff coming up around that right now, but I also think that because this part of your chart is hosting the stuff that's happening in your fourth. I wonder if that restriction was showing up in early school life, and also in the home in particular.
Less so school, more so the home.
Yeah, okay, so that makes sense because you have the stellium in the fourth and not in the third. The third is like early school life, siblings. I wonder if you have a sister that you may have had a more beneficial relationship with, only because we have Venus here in Capricorn, but she's not in a happy relationship with this restriction either. I don't know if you have a sister. That's just like that comes up sometimes when I see Venus in the third.
I have 4 sisters.
Oh my God. when, sometimes when I'm right, I'm really right. But yeah, so like, so I just cover that like in general because this is gonna show up in the fourth house family stuff. I feel like a lot of family stuff is coming up to be purged for you. A lot of that, like the way you got your communication style. I even see there's like a sense of like really, I feel like you probably have a really inventive way of speaking, and that might also like come up as a way of like dealing with that. But there's kind of like this sense of like inner revolution that I feel like I'm seeing. Right now I feel like it's very confusing. And that maybe even that inner revolution feels like a little muddied by not being able to identify it as something individual, because for you, I think it's collective. You're born around that. I was born with the Capricorn Neptune Uranus conjunction, and you have the co-presence happening in Aquarius. So right now with not right now, but like when Pluto enters Aquarius is what I should say, you're gonna have that conjunct your Neptune right away, and then it's already talking to your planets. So for the next, I'm gonna say for the next 15 years, like this is gonna be like dealing with the family of origin, and then everything that you've kind of like that's come up with the family origin. So there's
The
lots of
next
purging.
15 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Right now, like, or when it comes up, like I feel like there's going to be a plot line of the 15 years because it's going to be touching all of these planets. So I feel like the family part of your chart, or the family of origin, and like the things you've inherited from the family as of just a result of like coming into that ancestral line, is going to be transformed and changed in some way. So your relationship with it is likely going to be very different. So yeah, but I say 15 years because you get the sun. So this part is getting touched immediately, the Neptune, and then you go into the Mercury, and then the Uranus, and then at 18 degrees, the sun. And it's not going to be until after Pluto transits away from the sun that you're going to like kind of like be able to have a retrospective of like, oh, that's what that was about, or like kind of like get to have it in the rear view more. It's not necessarily going to be like a ton of crazy activity all the time. Pluto's a very slow moving planet. And so, but he tends to bring very permanent changes. So yeah, I would expect to see some like pretty intense family stuff, either just internally because it's in the fourth house, and even within the household if you still live with your family. Or it's going to be kind of like this inner revolution. And like I also wonder if there's going to be like some speaking on like you may be the one that ends up speaking on like things done in the dark, like things that you like, things come to light, you're the one that like you have some information about the family, or you come into contact with information about the family, and your Mercury is right there just being like, okay, now we got to speak on it. And that might not be a very comfortable place for you to be because it's hosted by and in seen by this Saturn here that's ruling it. So that's kind of what I'm seeing for you coming up in this. This is a pretty major chunk of your life. I'll say that much.
Interesting.
But does that make sense, or do you have any questions about that?
No, that definitely does make sense.
Awesome. Okay. And we're at 2:30. I did it. Thank you guys so much for coming and then trusting me with your charts and trusting me to transmit this information to you. To all of the people who have joined via the recording. Hi, I hope this was helpful. And I'm gonna turn the recording off. So bye, recording people.